Now, what we're going to do is we are going to separate our front end code that we've been writing up until this point, so all of our front end application code, into its own folder. And the reason we need to do this is because we have to have a separation between our back end and our front end. So what we'll do is we will make a new folder inside of this directory called client using the mkdir command. So this is pretty much make directory, and this will create a new folder for us called client. Now, what you want to do is you want to move everything inside of our existing directory, right, using the mv command, into this client folder. And when you do that, you will see an error that says the rename attempt of .client to .client/client is invalid. This is fine because you cannot move, of course, the client folder into the client folder, right? You can't move a folder into itself. But if you hit ls, you'll see that everything is gone now from our root. And if you cd into the client, you'll see all of the files that we had before. So now all of our front end code is inside of this client folder, which is what we want. If you open up this folder, though, you will see that you have a hidden .git folder and .gitignore folder still in this root file. You want to keep those there because the .git pretty much holds the history of all of our commits and our git. Anything related to our git is inside of here. And we want that. We want to keep the history that we've got so far. The gitignore is pretty much what tells whenever we make git commands what not to push to git. So we will modify this a little later after we finished writing all of our backend code. But this is pretty much what we needed to do. Next, what we have to do is we need to make a new package.json file. And the reason we need to do this is because our old package.json file is inside, if you remember, our client folder now. And that's perfectly fine because that package.json dictates all of the rules and all of the packages and the node modules related to the client, related to our front end. Our backend now is going to be a completely different set of dependencies, and we are going to make a new package.json file. So you can do that by saying touch package.json. Now you'll have a new package.json file. And while we're here, we might as well also touch a server.js file. This server.js file will represent pretty much the entry point for our server code. It's all going to go in this file. And let's just open this up and start modifying our package.json. Now, I have included for you the package.json base that we need. So you can just get that from the resources and then copy it into your package.json. And then you just paste it in. So inside of package.json here, I've named my project Crown Clothing Server. You can name yours whatever you want, but this just represents the backend server. Version 1.0, perfectly fine. It's just the version of this package. And then here you'll see this scripts, right? So here we have the new scripts that we will be running. Now, when we run the client script, we are going to cd into our client folder, and then we're going to run yarn start there. So it's pretty much like running yarn start before in order for us to start up our front-end application on localhost 3000. This server command is going to run our server.js. So this is kind of like saying yarn start, but we're saying we want to instead run node server.js. Now, what is nodemon? Nodemon is a package we're going to include in our global, and what it does is it allows us to wrap our server.js, right? So wrap our node project around this new service called nodemon that pretty much gives us live reloading. Which just means that if we modify our server.js file and we're running our server will automatically restart. It's just the hot reloading that we had with our Create React app. You remember whenever we modified files or components, our application automatically restarted and we have the latest version. So what you're going to do is you're going to run npm i-g nodemon. And this will install nodemon into your global. Next, we have build, and build is the same that we had before. What it does is it CDs into the client and it runs our build script. The dev script is how we run both our server and client on one terminal. Typically, what we would do if we didn't use this package called concurrently is we would have to open up two terminals. One terminal would cd into our client, and then it would run yarn start here. And here we would run maybe like yarn server. The problem with that is just that we have to open up more terminals than we need to. And if one crashes, the other might still be running. But we don't want that because we can't develop one without the other, right? So we want to run this program called concurrently, which is included as a dev dependency, that allows us to run both on one terminal, as well as it allows us to pass this kill others on fail, which means that if one breaks, the other one will also break. So that's the main benefit of running concurrently. Start will just call node server.js, and we include this for Heroku. Heroku will be running our start script. So that's why we can't provide nodemon there, right? And we don't need hot reloading. We only need hot reloading for our development purposes. So there's no reason to include nodemon for a dev dependency on our final production. So that's why we can simply just run node server.js. And then we have this final script, Heroku post build. And this post build is a script that Heroku itself will run after it's finished building. And what it does is it's going to go into our client. It's going to install all of our node modules. And then it's going to install any of our dev dependencies. And then this no shrink wrap is a flag that we put in where we don't want to shrink wrap things. And shrink wrapping just means that it locks down all of the dependency versions, which we just don't want that to do. And then finally, we just call our npm run build, which we know will build our client's build folder. And we wanted to do that because we want to actually host out of our build folder. And I'll show you how we're going to do that inside of our server. But let's just go over our dependencies. We have this body parser library that allows us to pretty much run this body parser middleware in our server. That allows us to leverage certain things. The main thing that we want to leverage is that we want the requests that we get to convert their bodies into JSON so that we can actually read it easier. You remember we did this with fetch. Whenever we fetched anything, we had to call .json on it in order to convert it into JSON so we can read it in our JavaScript. This just makes it easier for us to do that. We're also running CORS, which is a library that allows us to handle cross-origin requests. We'll go over that when we actually use it. There's this .env as well, and this .env allows us to actually store secret keys. So if you remember, I was mentioning that Stripe requires us to actually keep that secret key on our backend server. Well, we're going to put it in .env. This is how we actually keep those keys secret on our web server. And I'll show you how we're going to do that as well. Express is the framework that we're running that pretty much makes it easier for us to write our Node backend. If I had to just teach you Node, it would end up being an extremely, extremely long lesson because Node is actually quite extensive to write by hand. Express is a framework that makes it all very easy. You can kind of see it as something akin to a front-end framework like Angular, except for the backend. And then the Stripe is our Stripe library that we use to actually make charges. So now that we have our package.json, we have our server.js file that we just made, we're going to also make sure to yarn. Oh, whoops, I didn't save. So make sure to save. And now if you run yarn, this will include all of our files that we need. And then what you need to do is you also need to add in this new key called engines right here. So what this will do is it'll tell our project what version of Node and NPM that we're running. Here you're going to write node-v and copy over these numbers. And you're just going to say inside of our engines, Node goes to the version 10.15.3. 3, right? Or whatever your version of node you get is. This is mine at the current moment. And then you're going to do the same thing for npm. So you're going to copy this number over. And inside of here, you're going to point to this version of npm. And this is pretty much all we need to do inside of our package.json. And now we have all of the code that we need to start writing our server.js. So let's get started with that in the next lesson.